But now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Steve Lipman, who will serve as the MC for the first half of the event. Steve graduated from the college in 1967 with a degree in literature. He received a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Oregon in 1972 and taught comparative lit and Spanish until 1985. With the help of a National Endowment for the Humanities program grant, he pivoted to a career in business, first as securities analyst and then as a financial writer and editor at Morgan Stanley, where he's worked for 25 years. Take it away, Steve.
Hi, thanks, April. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Quandra Prettyman, this year's recipient of the Walter F. Anderson Award. First, a couple of words about the award. It honors the achievements of alumni and friends of Antioch who have broken ethnic barriers. Walter Anderson was the longtime chair of the music department and the first Black department head at the college. And he and Quandra overlapped at Antioch, and I am hoping that she will share anecdotes with you. I met Quandra last December at the New York chapter's Alumni Association holiday party. And her energy, her intellect, and her wit simply blew me away. And I was captivated by her story of blazing a trail as the first African-American in the English department at Barnard College, where she taught for 50 years. When the nominating committee of the Alumni Board asked us to suggest nominees for the 2020 awards, I immediately thought of Quandra. And I am so happy to be able to introduce you to her today. She's going to engage in dialogue with her classmate, Dorothy Perkins Montague, class of 1957, and Lisa Crone, the daughter of Ann Beckett Crone, class of 55, who was an extremely close friend of Quandra. So I will be moderating questions from the audience after their dialogue, and let me now turn it over to Dorothy.
Okay, Steve, thank you. I've been a long time friend of Quandra, whom I met in my first year at Antioch, and we were brought together by books. I was allowed to take an advanced literature course with Vivian Bresnahan, and it required a lot of research on my part to do papers for her. I went to the library, and to my amazement, most of the books that I was looking for were not there. They were checked out to somebody by the name of Quandra Prettyman. And it turned out that they were in her room. And I traipsed off to, I think she was living at Graywood at the time. And that was my first introduction to Quandra, in that she had books out on Plato and other such subjects, and I had to wrest them from her grasp so that I too could do some research and produce a paper. We've been friends, as I said, for years. I think not just at the college, but also because my husband and I lived in New York City for many years, as did Quandra, and her family and my family remained very involved. My sons have known her, and it's just been a very enriching relationship. So that's a little summary of my relationship with Quandra. I thought very much about what I'd like to ask Quandra at this event, and came up with two questions, somewhat prompted by recent events. the first question was wondering what her expectations were as a young person of color from Baltimore when she decided to attend Antioch. So shall I give her time now to answer that?
Sure. Well, uncommonly, Antioch was attractive to some people because of its work-study program. But I, in fact, fell in love with the idea of the honor system and the community governance. And they were a draw, along with my parents saying I could go as far away. I grew up in Baltimore, as New York, Pennsylvania, or Ohio. And they didn't know how far into Ohio I would get to get to Yellow Springs, which is as far away as you can get. In a town that my father said, and they didn't have fast cars then, if you drove too fast, you would miss it. On the other hand, I had an interview with, I think his name was Dixon, is that right, Perk, the admissions man? And I had to go to Washington, D.C. for that. And obviously they had read in my application or knew somehow that my parents were school teachers. So he kept talking to me about how I could have a lot of experience teaching on the work-study program. And I was a barely 17, maybe 16-year-old. I didn't know how to tell him that the only thing in the world I knew was that I did not want to grow up to be a teacher. Even I may get to how that changed, but that was the only thing I knew. They worked too hard, their work days never ended. And I wanted to grow up and be a librarian. Then I'm going to cut this short. I'm going to tie it to another story that Perk brought up. One of my fellow classmates in this period, Lester Schulman, who I hope is here, Les once said he couldn't find a book in the library that didn't have my signature in it.
As I said, Quandra, I think, wanted to grow up to be a librarian.
Yes.
As long as the library was in her home.
Well, now you want to walk around here?
Right. One of my sons feels that one of his lifelong ambitions is to have an apartment or home like Quandra's, where every wall is covered by bookshelves. And he hasn't gotten there yet, but he's working on it. So that's fine. Well, I have another question.
Yeah.
Which has to do with what your experience at Antioch was when, well, at any rate, when there were so few other Black students, there was only one professor, Walter Anderson, who was Black, and there were no other either faculty or administrative staff who were of a diverse background in the 1950s. And I'm wondering what what that effect may have had on you as a young person and how it might have impacted on your education.
Perk, this is so funny. I don't even know why I didn't think of this the very first time we ever spoke about this. It was perhaps the luck of the draw But, and I love telling my students this, they are so impressed. My hall advisor, my resident advisor was Coretta Scott.
Oh, okay.
So,
All right.
so I was not at a loss if I had sought one, for a Black presence.
Mhm.
And Corey was wonderfully patient about my, what I would call naivete.
Mm.
I grew up in a segregated Black community, a very protected child with no hostile connections to white people and no more involvement with white people probably than growing up in Jamaica or Ghana would bring.
Mm-hmm.
So we start there. I get to Yellow Springs, and there is a cafe, diner, bar on Main Street. And I go out the first week with a group of my fellow classmates. Now, my fellow classmates are all going to be always white unless otherwise identified. I go out with a group of my classmates. We go to this place. And when I come back, I say to Corey, it was really very funny. You know, the owner was quite rude. He sort of smacked the coffee down. And I said to her, and no, that's what I said to her. And she said, no. And then I said, it must have been close to closing time. And she said, what time was it? And I said, it was 7:30. I might have said 8:30. And one of the things I treasure about her is that she, in effect, more or less just sort of patted me and said nothing. Which is to say, she didn't say, honey, if you don't know what you just happened to you, you have a lot to learn. And I've always treasured that. And I sort of forget that I always had her, if I was looking. Now, Antioch's past there is really crazy. I think Corey was of the first generation of the very, very limited number of Black students, the one or two who might have become hall advisors, where the college recognized that a Black hall advisor probably shouldn't be asked to ask a white student if she objected to living with a Black student.
Right.
And so there were all of those elements. And I learned a lot in the years at Antioch, including courses I took, people I met, heading off to spend a summer work camp in Mexico, where, in fact, and then Steve, you may need to cut this sort of story short, I met my first episode of overt racism that I was aware of. The train broke down in Laredo, Texas, headed for Mexico City. And we had to spend the night, just me, in fact. And when I got off the train, I sort of sauntered, I think, into the train station, looking for a hotel to stay in that night.
Mm-hmm.
And discovered there were no hotels for Black people to stay in that night in Laredo, Texas. And then because of the long train ride and all of those things, the Pullman porters who know these things, had noticed me. And at least one of them or a couple of them said, come, we'll take you to where we stay. Because they do have to spend the night. And we went out to this house. And what I remember is there were two rooms. One of them was full of, lined up with cots. And the other had a drape and a bed. And they put me in the room with the bed and closed the drape And it was many years later that I thought that other bed was for another purpose. and so that was one thing. Now, another thing that happened at Antioch that Perk is connected with, and it's part of the reason I wanted her to be here, was that her husband, Dick Montague, was an Antioch alum, and I don't know how I missed giving you his year and all of those. And he edited the newspaper. The newspaper office is where I learned to type, but where another one of my seminal experiences with race occurred. I didn't know, as with many things, how uncommon it was. But one of the things that happened was that Ralph Ellison came to speak at Antioch. And along with the young man I was dating then, who was senior in the college newspaper world, I was off to be with him to deal with Ralph Ellison. And I have many Ralph Ellison stories to tell, but that was another figure who impacted my life, my sense of what we would generally call race in America, very clearly in some ways. But I want you to know, because I found it out in reviewing a book of Ellison's letters. In the months before Brown versus Board of Education, Ellison put together a speaking tour of historically Black colleges and universities. Parentheses, in those days, only a smattering of white schools, such as Antioch and Princeton, invited him to their campus. Mm-hmm. And I was there. It was the start of a long mentorship, friendship, a lot of other stories. It was a strange place and a very free. Yeah. How are we doing, Steve?
Yeah, I think it's time for Lisa to ask you some questions.
Good. Hi, kid.
Sure. Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Crone, and I did not go to Antioch, but Quandra asked me to participate in this event because she and my mother.
I'm sorry, I was throwing Walter in.
Yes. She knew both of my parents. My mother became Ann Crone and Beckel, and Quandra were very good friends. And as we've been leading up to this event, and I've been thinking about this conversation, this introduction, I'm so thrilled to be able to do this. This award recognizes the contributions of alumni and friends who've advanced the college's ideals by breaking down racial and ethnic barriers. And the nominees are chosen because they've shown fortitude and effectiveness in achieving these goals. And I thought, that is really so, I believe I am the perfect person to speak to that with Quandra, because I literally would not be here were it not for Quandra. She introduced my parents to each other. And when they were students together at Antioch, my mother and Quandra became very close. And my mother they went to each other's hometowns. My mother spent a summer living with Quandra's family in Baltimore. And this was, in many ways, the seminal experience of my mother's life. I think the experience for her as a white person from a segregated, racist small town in Michigan, of being inside of this family, in segregated Baltimore. Well, it changed everything about the course of her life. And she became a neighborhood organizer. And in the town that I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, she worked with neighbors very successfully, fighting redlining, fighting disinvestment. And the neighborhood that I grew up in has remained an integrated, racially integrated neighborhood. They fought for an equitable busing plan, for instance. All of that was informed by this very humanizing experience of living with Quandra's family, and also having Quandra come to Northville and experiencing, through her friendship and identification with Quandra,
Yes.
the reactions, even though they were, as my mother used to tell the story, people said to her, the minister of the church said to her, "We never would have said anything to her face."
Yeah.
So there's that. Also, my spouse, as it turned out, when we got together, and I said something about Quandra, and my spouse, Madeline George, said, "Oh, I know Quandra. I've taught with her at Barnard for years. We've had lunch many times." So really, Quandra is everywhere in my life, and not just the existence of my family, the ethos of my family. I realize that Quandra is responsible for all of it, as it turns out, as I'm sure is not surprising to anyone who knows her, that has been her effect. I think April's going to show, I have a couple of photographs that I want to share of Quandra from her days at Antioch.
Oh, great.
They come up here. Oh, yes. So this is not my mother with Quandra. This is somebody else, but this is a wonderful picture of Quandra at Antioch, still as gorgeous as she was. If you want to switch to the next one.
Yes, yes.
There's another one. Oops.
Do we have one of Anne?
Yeah. I threw this task at April. Oh, these are Quandra's parents. This is a picture that my mother had from when she lived there.
Oh, how lovely.
Of Quandra's parents. I met Quandra's father when I was in Baltimore and went to visit her family in I think it was maybe the late 90s. Very, very handsome gentleman, wonderful. And I think there's one more that's not a very, it's a little bit grainy, but yeah. So in this one, you see Quandra's on the end, and next to her is my mom.
Yes.
More people, yeah. So when I was talking with Quandra, thank you so much, April. Thank you for sharing those. When I was talking with Quandra about this conversation, one of the things, and we were sort of talking about the things I just said, and one of the things she was very keen to say was that the nature of their friendship was not political; it was just a friendship. And I think that certainly, there was both of them had a political sensibility, but I think part of its longevity and really its power was that their friendship was because they were friends, because they really loved each other. And it lasted their entire, my mother died a few years ago, but it lasted their entire lives. Quandra traveled to Michigan for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And I know that I believe, Quandra, you have a couple stories you want to share. When we were preparing for this, I started to ask some things and Quandra was like, no, I don't want to have the discussion before we have the discussion. So I wonder if you could share a couple of reminiscences from that time and that friendship.
Well, in fact, no. I'm coming up later. And one of the reasons I most wanted you to be here was that I think that Anne became the person who would have been, if she was still around, really deserving of this award. And I wanted it spoken. Now, I got to tell you also for your pleasure, that some of it's been very well spoken because this is, you only know Elisa, she's introduced you as a child of two people, as that. But in fact, she is a playwright, and she's a playwright of some distinction. And one of her early works, not the earliest, incidentally, one of her early works is a play called Well. It opened first off Broadway, believe it or not, 50 years after I graduated, which would be many years after those years we spent in Baltimore and in Northfield. And it recounts and recovers some of the work Anne did in Michigan. And it is the one really lasting place I have in literature. It mentions my name. And I loved it when I went to see it, and some of the actors said, "There's a real Quandra." I had one of my best moments.
I'll tell you that when Quandra came to see the play at the Public Theater, and in the monologue, her name is spoken, Quandra jumped out of her seat and threw her arms up and said, "That's me."
Steve,
Quandra, that's extremely moving. This is your day and your very, very, very well-deserved award. And I know that my mother would, both my parents would just be thrilled to be celebrating you right now.
You bet.
Yes, and I would just like to interject that Quandra, in her role as matchmaker, introduced my husband and myself. And I'm sorry that Dick is not here. He died about 2 years ago, but he would have loved to have been here, Quandra, to congratulate you and to also share his feelings of our friendship for so many years and how important it has been for us.
Notice how successful I've been at long and happy reunions.
Yes, my goodness.
I might say often between two people who at the beginning didn't think that was where they were going.
The other thing is that my parents both went to Antioch they were at Antioch at the same time. They did not know each other there. They met later in Ann Arbor. And they said many times, well, everybody knew Quandra. Everybody knew Quandra. Yeah. I wonder if, Steve, if we should turn it over for questions now.
Or even to Steve for a while.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you want me to, so folks, now that we're in the Q&A section for the audience, feel free to either put your question in the chat and then Steve can ask the question from the chat. Or if you want to put the word stack in the chat, then that'll just give us an order that we can follow. So that's the way they do it on campus now to identify what order the speakers are in. Just put the word stack in there and then we'll follow the order of the stack. Steve, you want to kick us off?
Yes, let me ask one question of Quandra first. So Quandra, in your 50 years at Barnard, what was the greatest barrier you encountered as a person of color and how were you able to break through it?
Oh, that's a really tricky one. The barrier is, of course, fully institutional. I mean, it's
Yes.
It's a white. It was when white Christian college, women's college. I mean, very Protestant. And my greatest liberation came in later years in the unexpected fashion of gradually developing a department that focused, I didn't develop, other women, a department that focused on African American studies.
Yes.
And finding a welcome there that was very nourishing. Before that, nourishment existed in the form of encouragement. I taught a course in early African American literature, 1760 to 1890. And when I first proposed it, my colleagues much as at Antioch, white unless identified differently, often said, "Oh, sure, sure." In other words, that's the opening. And it also had hanging with it, but what would you teach? I was pleased with courses I taught at Barnard during different periods of time that I thought spoke to what we sort of now call diversity. I taught for many years a course called, my courses all have dull names, the literature of minority women or minority women writers. And we studied Native American women, African American women, Latinas, and Asian American women. That's in the order, in the sense of their arrival on our continent. And they are all tied together by positive discriminatory law.
Right.
I was very proud of that because I believe at the time that it was one of the few courses that did all four groups. On the West Coast and in the West, they did do Native American women sometimes. And here they did Puerto Rican literature. Out West, they sometimes did Chicanas. They were more likely to do Asian Americans. And the American South, they were more likely to do Blacks. It was fun to pull them all together. Another one I really liked, these dinner, was a course called Slavery, the Woman's Experience, Black and White. That was a very important course to me.
Yes, I would think
because Black women were slaves and white women were owned.
Right.
And there's a need to understand some of that experience. So we could read Fanny Kimball, and we could read, we even read Gone with the Wind.
Right.
Yeah, and of course the many of the historic Black women writers, and it was up, to Morrison. It was easy to do, but to show that cross section of things was very important to me. I like doing that.
We have a question in the stack from Joan Stramanis.
Huh?
Say okay.
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yes.
Hi, Quandra. You and I overlapped in Antioch. I was just a kid, so you didn't notice me.
Oh.
At that time was Joan Cole, and
yes.
And I noticed you. Oh my goodness, you were so sophisticated. You were so smart, so beautiful. And of course, I couldn't help but notice you. And it seemed to me that we hung out together, or at least we crossed paths together.
Yes.
In what we called Pinnell, which was the social science building. We've been corrected. It's supposed to be Pennell.
Oh.
But anyway, I wanted you to reminisce about Everett Wilson, because I associate you with Everett Wilson because you, it seemed to me, were either studying with him or working with him, and he was one of the best professors that I had at Antioch. So
wasn't Everett a student?
Sorry?
No.
But he was.
Wasn't Everett Wilson?
I thought he was a student.
Sorry?
Dorothy, I thought he was a student.
No. I don't think that overlap really occurred. As my experience as a psych and philosophy major and taking courses in sociology with Ev Wilson. Quandra, did you have any courses with Ev Wilson?
That's what I meant.
No, I did
Maybe it was Heinz Uhlau.
Heinz Uhlau knew.
Sorry?
I babysat for him.
You babysat for him. Anyway, you were hanging around with professors, and I thought you would have some stories for us.
And, oh, not really. I babysat for Heinz Ulau.
Everybody babysat for Heinz Ulau.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I did a babysit, and it was, in fact, my only connection with Walter Anderson. For Walter, and Steve is very fond of the story I tell about one of the few times I did that when he asked me what I'd like for lunch. And I thought, sort of, I can have anything out of this Southern kitchen. And I asked for grits and ham, and he made them. Walter Anderson, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Let me jump in and ask a question from the chat. This is from Athena Turner Frederick. What would you say was your best teaching moment, and what was the most Antiochian?
I don't know what I would call a best teaching moment. The Antiochian part is my distinguishing characteristic as a teacher. And I sometimes have to, I enjoy, remind my students that I didn't graduate from Barnard or any Ivy League college, and the things I do. I do an enormous amount still of small group work. I do an enormous amount of what do you want to do, which is really far more challenging. I'm never good about saying write a paper that does this. I go for what do you want to do? They don't think it's challenging first, and then it really is, because it's you have to find the thing you want to work on, or you. And so it has to. I'm also known. I dress for you guys. In fact, but my kids all know that I wear denim all the time. I owe that to Antioch. My mother sent me off to college in a suit and a hat. I went back the first time wearing blue jeans and sneakers. And in fact, Corey remembers our denim being our uniform. I don't know if it still is, but it's anyway. So that's a standard. I said, oh, and then I better stop. This is just a cute story. But that jacket I'm wearing in the picture Lisa has of the four of us, got to wear it to Barnard. Some of my students came in wearing denim jackets one day. Several of them had on denim jackets. I said, why don't we all wear our denim next time? I have a denim jacket. Next time they didn't wear the denim jackets. I got to give them the school teacher talk. Didn't you understand that was an assignment? I'm wearing mine, I'll wear it again, you wear yours. And then I got to come out in my denim jacket with the pink triangles, which take on a fresh and new meaning that doesn't bug me at all, doesn't bother me. But at the time, they had those little pink things, I think, just to say it's girlish. And I said, this is my denim jacket from my first year at college. And look, it's really worn. I didn't buy it worn. This is really a worn denim jacket you're looking at. I enjoyed that. So my teaching is awfully informed by that. The other thing is I try to get people to do what they do best and to make them successful by finding a space for them to do what they do best. And that's led to some strange things sometimes.
One last quick question.
Yes.
What was your favorite co-op job?
I worked in every public library in the Bronx and many of them in New York City because I so wanted to be a librarian. I worked in the library at Barnard because I wanted to be close to the man I was dating, and we were on different divisions at Antioch. And as I said at the beginning, I wasn't at all interested in the job program. I mean, it was not my draw. I mean, I'm sorry. It had nothing, you know, I didn't.
Well, you've been a joy, Quandra. I am so happy that you're here to receive this award. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Lisa. And I think I'll turn it over to April now.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Quandra and Dorothy and Lisa, so much for drawing the stories out of
My
Quandra. And
pleasure.
you, Quandra, for sharing them.